This here is the constituency of Poole, located in Dorset on the south coast of England. Since its creation in 1950, a member of the Conservative Party has been elected as its MP in every single general election, making it one of the safest Tory seats in the country. That is, up until 2024, where Duncan-Jordan became the first Labour MP for the constituency, winning by just 18 votes. I recently had the opportunity to interview him, and here's what he had to say. Hello, Neil.
Hello, Nathan. How are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
I'm very well.
It's lovely to meet you. Honestly, I've just been so excited seeing the work that you've been doing for Poole, because I've lived here my whole life.
Right.
Very local, and obviously always had a Conservative MP. So having a Labour MP is fascinating. And you've been so vocal in the community. It's been absolutely amazing. So I wanted to interview you, not just because it's helps, but it's just genuinely I really wanted to talk to you.
Yeah, so. No, it's fine. It's very nice of you to say. I mean, I'm assuming that your entire life there's been a Conservative MP.
Yes, literally.
So it is a bit of a change.
Yeah. I mean, it's even less of like political parties, really. It's just in terms of the actual representation in Parliament, hearing speeches and seeing you communicate with people. I think it was the other day you posted about a water break with Wessex Water. Right? Yeah. And just having stuff like that, it just feels like it's so nice. And I saw you're visiting Bournemouth University, I think, as well.
Yeah. I mean, I've done a number of visits to Bournemouth University, but also lots of other organisations, lots of other businesses, community groups. I'm sort of reaching out as much as I can. I've been an MP for 4 months, and it's not very long.
No,
no. And for half of that time, I didn't have an office. So actually it's a very small amount of time in which I've been operating properly. And we're trying to do things differently. We're trying to make it much more accessible so that, the MP is contactable, people can get hold of you, they can book appointments, they can raise their problems with you, you'll see them, you'll answer their letters, you'll answer their emails. I'm not sure that was done before to any great extent. And we're doing the basics. We're putting the basics in place so that people get a proper service. Doesn't mean I can fix everything, right? I haven't got a magic wand, but it means that if someone writes to me, they get a reply.
So going back then 4 months, I think the most fascinating thing was me and my friends, we stayed up all night watching the election. And it's like, it hits 7 a.m. think we'll just stay for Poole, see what happens, and then we'll go to bed. Then it hits 8 a.m., then 9 a.m. And I think, was it like 12 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon?
It was about 11 o'clock in the morning, roughly, between 11 and 11:30. So we had 1 count and 3 recounts. So that all takes a huge amount of time, as you appreciate. And I won every single one of those counts. So every time it was counted, I always won by differing amounts, but I always won. And eventually we got to a point where I won by 18 votes twice. And then the returning officer said, we're not going to count anymore. It's quite clear. We've done it twice and it matches. I think the Conservatives did want to push it for another recount.
Probably.
But the returning officer was not minded to do that. He said, look, everybody's had enough. It's quite clear that,
I mean, I heard, I don't know how true this is, but apparently there was some rumor that the room you guys were in initially, there was like some sort of dance class that was meant to be in there, so you had to move.
No, that's not true. What happened was there was a naked model coming in for a life drawing class. And they hadn't realised that they couldn't come in because we were still using the room. So this model turns up and the other people turned up to do the class and had to be turned away because there was no room for them to use it. So because they didn't expect that we would still be there at 11 o'clock in the morning.
That's crazy. That's amazing. I love that story because I remember it was getting to the afternoon and finally got to see your speech, the victory speech. It was so nice to see. And I think that's such a strong message, especially locally, like how close an election can be.
Absolutely.
18 votes.
Absolutely.
As a trade union officer, I hope they're getting double time for the time that they've been putting in. I also want to make it clear that we couldn't do this on our own. So I want to thank the other candidates that have taken part in this process. I want to thank those who were at telling stations and polling stations and the police and others that were helping to make sure that this was smooth. But I tell you something, we've made history tonight. Never in the history of this constituency have you had a Labour MP, and that changes now. And I'll tell you something else. I've won 4 times tonight. Not just once, not just twice, not just 3 times, but 4 times. Every single door we knocked on, we had conversations with people who said it's time for change. It's time for something different. And when people say to you, it doesn't matter voting, I don't know why people bother. The fact that I got in by 18 votes shows how important it is that you exercise your democratic right and get out there and vote. And the other thing that was very clear, talking to people on the doorstep, was that they wanted a different kind of society. They want a society that's compassionate, that's caring, and that does the right thing for working class people, and that's what I intend to do as the MP for Poole. Thanks very much, and solidarity.
And I made the point in the speech, and repeat it to others. Your vote really, as an individual, your vote really does count, and it proved that that was correct. Because had those 18 people not been bothered, we would have had a tie. Or had only 20 people more not voted for me, we would have a Conservative MP still. So it really did make a massive difference, those people. So everybody who turned out, I'm really grateful for, everyone we persuaded, everyone we talked to, everyone we convinced to come out and give us a chance really made a massive difference. And one of the things that was key to our victory was the amount of conversations we were having with people on the doorstep. So to be honest, the other parties weren't really knocking on doors, okay? They were relying on other methods of communication, but we were old school. We were going out, knocking on doors we'd never knocked on before, and having long and detailed conversations with people, trying to convince them to vote Labour. And the feedback was often, you're the only person who's knocked on my door, and because you're the only person who's knocked on my door, I'm going to give you my vote because you want it, because you've come and asked for it. No one else has done that. So that was a huge sort of benefit for us to get out, be seen, talk to people. Didn't win over everybody, obviously, but we won over enough to make a difference.
Yeah, if you didn't knock on 18 houses, may not be an MP.
Absolutely,
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then going a bit before that, before you were an MP, you worked with UNICEF and the National Pensioners. I forgot the National Pensioners.
Yeah, it was Unison, the trade union.
Oh, Unison. Sorry.
Yeah, and the National Pensioners Convention prior to that as well.
Yeah. So just how did that really affect, not like your career, but also becoming an MP and things you were looking for?
Yeah, I mean, so probably from about the age of 14, I've been involved in politics. So I've always been involved in politics. Not always the Labour Party, but in politics. I went on my first demonstration age 14. It was a youth CND march in London. And that sort of campaigning approach to politics has always been with me ever since a sort of young age. I then got involved in the trade union movement when I first went to work at 18, and I've been a trade unionist ever since. And obviously at some point that became my job. That was my paid job. The period that I did with the National Pensioners Convention before that, it was very much policy work. It was writing policies about social care, about social security, about pensions, about intergenerational fairness. So it was a lot of writing, a lot of analysis, a lot of research, which gave me a greater understanding of those sort of issues, which did, in no small part, influence why I didn't vote with the government when it came to the winter fuel allowance. So, for example, people don't always get this, but I'd spent 20 years arguing for a particular point of view, and then I come to be an MP, and within 70 days of an MP, I'm being told by my party to basically undo everything I'd argued for the 20 years before. Well, I wasn't prepared to do that.
We should also recognise that there is still a stigma attached to having to declare that you are struggling. And concepts around the deserving poor are as old as this building. And I thought that in the 21st century, we would be hoping for something better. The key question, Madam Deputy Speaker, with any means-tested system is where do you draw the line? And by its very nature, the biggest losers will be those who are just above the cut-off point. In my constituency, around 19,000 people will miss out. Historically in the UK, we have had long-standing problems. Poor housing, which are difficult to keep warm, one of the lowest pensions in Europe, rising energy costs and annual cold-related winter deaths among older people. I could go on, but I'm running out of time. So I urge the government to think very seriously about delaying this proposal and in its place putting forward a pensioner task force to look at ways in which we can tackle pensioner poverty in the UK.
So these things do have they do have an impact, you know. I wasn't prepared to say that I'd been wrong for those 20 years, because I don't believe I was, and I still don't believe I was. But obviously I was being told to do something different, and obviously I didn't go along with that. So there is a direct link between what I was doing before and, you know, what I'm doing now.
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of what I wanted to ask about next, because I think it's very, in some ways, courageous, you know, being such a new MP and still standing to your principles and saying, I disagree with this. How is this being executed? I want to talk about this more. And knowing that that's from your background, it has a, for me at least, obviously I'm not a pensioner, but knowing that there's that voice actually looking out for individuals and like proper working people and everything, it's just so refreshing. So yeah, that's really amazing. And then I guess the other thing is something you've more recently been talking about is the Poole Civic Centre, and how it's they're trying to sell it off. So I was just curious more about like what you're sort of campaigning for with that, and like what you'd maybe like to see be done with it.
Yeah, so I mean, when the council said that they were going to sell off the Civic Centre, I described it as public vandalism, because because these are assets that the public own. Okay, they're a council building, but it's public money that's made that building over the years and sustained it and maintained it and so on. And it belongs to Poole. It doesn't belong to the council, it belongs to Poole. The council maintain it on behalf of the people, but it's the people who actually own it, in my view. And what the council were wanting to do to balance their books in the short term was to sell it off to the private sector. Once we lose that asset, we'll never get it back again. So if it becomes a hotel or, you know, posh flats or whatever, we're never going to get that back again. And yet, from being an MP just for those few months, I know that we're crying out for space like that to be used for all sorts of things. Community groups need space that they can work out of. Businesses need space that they can work out of. And more importantly, there are key workers, so people working in the hospital just down the road who can't find places to live. Why couldn't the Civic Centre be turned into a key worker housing complex or something of that nature, or a mixture of things? I made that argument with the council. They weren't listening. You know, I and others, particularly the Labour Party in Poole, campaigned against that. We managed, when the vote came through, to get a partial victory, which was that they're going to keep some of it and they're going to sell some of it off. I'm still not very happy about that, but, you know, we are where we are. And I'm hoping that the bit that we're keeping, we can use for those positive things. I had a meeting with the Community Action Network yesterday. They're looking for new premises. You know, why can't they be given somewhere in the Civic Centre? You know, it's our asset, and we should use it in the best possible way for the town, for the community. And I don't think selling it off to a private developer to make flats that local people can't afford, I don't think that's the answer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so telling of like the potential shift in Poole of like people's perspectives, rather than looking at like, you know, the private sector and like building private flats and everything, thinking how do we actually build it up? Because obviously I know there's the big difference between the MP and the council, but as you've clearly shown, is that the MP has such a voice to say this is what people want and this is what I am standing for.
Yeah.
And to have that shift from Conservative to Labour already is just little things like that, where I guarantee you if that happened 1 year ago, it's going to get sold off immediately.
Absolutely.
I can think of, you know, other places in Poole where the same things happen to them. So it's really, really nice to see. Yeah, so I guess that leads into sort of like the final thing, is just sort of what changes would you like to see come to not just Poole, but also BCP as a whole? Because obviously, you know, Poole is its own separate thing, but
sure,
works so closely with Bournemouth and Christchurch.
Yeah.
So just what changes do you want to see come? Is little or as much detail as you like?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are some key issues that come through the door regularly to do with Poole. The lack of affordable housing is a regular issue that people come and talk to me about. We've got people who are homeless, not because they're living on the street, but they're sofa surfing, or they're living in overcrowded accommodation, or some of them are living in vans. You know, we have a serious lack of affordable housing for people. We have to address that, and the government has to address that as well. That isn't something that Poole can solve on its own. It's going to need a government effort. And we are moving towards that. I mean, Labour have got a commitment to build 1.5 million homes in the 5 years. We need to get on with that. We need to really start moving on that. So that is an area. The other area that comes through the door quite a lot is families who've got SEND children and the difficulties that they face. Again, Labour are putting in £1 billion into SEND, but we need to make that transition for those families so much easier, because it's a massive battle at the moment. They have to go through lots of hurdles to try and get what they want. Don't always get what they want. Challenges from the council all the time. Lots of barriers. We need to make that process a lot better for those families. So that's another area where I definitely think we need to see improvements. But more longer term, I'm looking to run an event early next year which brings together business, environmental groups, educational groups, community groups and so on, to try and see how we can come up with a package of possible policies that Poole could adopt to make it a really progressive place to live. I'm interested in how we can make our town, you know, really, really a sort of place that people want to come to. They want to live there, but they want to come and raise their families, and they can afford to do so, you know, and they can work as well there. That's really, really important. If we don't crack that problem, then, you know, Poole's not going to develop, it's not going to grow, it's not going to improve. And I think any growth that we see, I know the government keeps talking about growth, it's got to be balanced with the impact that's having on the environment, sustainability and so on. So, for example, it's no good building brand new estates where people can live if there's no doctor's surgery, if there's no school that kids can go to, if there are no shops. It then just becomes a sort of commuter belt type affair, which isn't really what we need or what we want. So yes, we need the growth and the development, but it has to be done in a sustainable way. And that's what I'm hoping we can get to. So whether we'll come up with any of those answers in the next 3 to 4 years, I don't know, but we're gonna try and do things differently, and we're gonna see how far we can get.
Yeah, absolutely. So in 5 years' time, are you ambitious about like the changes you would have made? Do you think in 5 years, even no matter what the landscape's looking like, you'll feel like you're going to have a positive impact on Poole?
I mean, from a MP's point of view, it's all about what change you can bring about. Because if you come in and nothing changes in the 5 years that you've been in, then you haven't really achieved very much. And that operates on two main levels. One is the local and one is in Westminster. So locally, I know for a fact that my office has helped hundreds of people already who've come in through the door with problems. We can't fix everything, but there are a number of those people that we have helped, with their particular issue. So that's positive in that sense. That's about making an impact, having an impact and an effect on things. At the Westminster level, there are things that I think you can do either publicly or privately. So an example is, I was one of few Labour MPs to stand up in the budget and say, I thought that hospices should be made exempt from the national insurance contribution rise that the Chancellor proposed. Lots of opposition people said it, not very many Labour people said it. I said it. And then a few days later, we hear that Wes Streeting is considering making them exempt. This is all about pressure. This is all about how you can try and get from where you are to where you want to be, and finding the most effective route of getting what you want. And I'm still working that out. It's been very early days, so it's not, I don't have all the answers to how I get ministers to change their mind or whatever, but I'm working on that, and I'm working out how best to do that. Sometimes it might be a phone call to the minister, sometimes it might be a letter, sometimes it might be meeting a special advisor, sometimes it might be making a speech in the House, sometimes it might be going on the radio and shouting at somebody. It's, there are various ways to try and get influence, and all of them are valid, at the end of the day. You just pick the one that's best for the particular point that you're trying to make. And all of that's a learning curve, and you're trying to find a way through. One of the things I would say, which the public need to recognise, is that when you have an MP who's in the same party as the party of government, that MP has greater access to the ministers. So if we hadn't have got a Labour MP, but we had a Labour government, the Conservative MP here wouldn't be getting through the door to speak to the minister. I can tell you that for nothing. Having a Labour MP, I can get meetings with ministers and so on, which I have got, which I think an opposition MP would struggle to do. So there is a huge benefit having an MP who's on the same side as the government of the day.
Yeah, that's a very nature of politics, I guess.
Yeah.
Don't want to cross the line.
Well, because you see these people much more. They're in the same lobby that I'm in.
Yeah.
By and large, and they're in the tea room when you're in the tea room, because they're Labour and you're Labour, you're sitting next to them. So it's much easier to have that sort of conversation. And because you're on the same side broadly, they're more receptive to answering your phone call, more receptive to answering your letter, and so on. So that, it just makes it easier.
Sort of wanted to ask about what it was like your first few days going to Westminster and signing and everything, and because I imagine that was a very sobering experience being in the chamber.
Yeah, as a brand new MP, you get handed a letter on the day you get elected. It's a letter for the MP, and the letter basically says, turn up to Westminster on Monday. That's all it says, or the following Monday. So you trundle off on the train up to Westminster, and you enter into like an induction type program. But your head is absolutely full with taking everything in. And I've described it as a mixture, those early days, as a mixture between Freshers' Week at university and Hogwarts. And because that's what because the Parliament, the Palace of Westminster, is very old, of course, and that's the Hogwarts element. And the fact that there's lots of new people around trying to get to know each other is very much like Freshers' Week at uni. So it was that sort of combination. And within the first few days, you have to take the oath of allegiance, which basically swears you in as an MP. And from that day on, you are an MP officially. So you're not really an MP until you've made the oath, and you get about a week or so to do that in. I think I did mine 3 or 4 days after I arrived. And you all basically queue up. You all queue up, and you go into the chamber and you make this declaration in front of the speaker and so on, and then you move on. It takes a couple of minutes, it's not difficult. And from then on, the next big milestone is making your maiden speech. So I made my maiden speech pretty early on, actually. Within the first few weeks. I mean, you know, there were still people yesterday doing their maiden speeches. So we're talking about months afterwards. People have, you know, left it. My advice that I was given was, you know, get in as quickly as you can, get it done, get it out of the way, and then you can start to do things. But the second speech I made in the House was criticising the government. So it was a really difficult time. I'd been an MP for 70 days, which is not a huge amount of time.
No.
I was the only new Labour MP in that debate to criticise the government. There were other MPs, Labour MPs, who criticised the government, but they'd been there for 25 years. It's a bit different. You know, people don't, I've had a lot of criticism, people saying I was a coward and what. People have got to understand, 70 days, I didn't even have an office, right? I mean, you know, to make that sort of statement, it did take quite a lot of, you know,
confidence.
Well, confidence, courage, all those sorts of things to have a go, because I thought it was right, and I stick by that. I absolutely stick by that. People say, "Oh, I bet you wish you'd done something." No, absolutely, I think I did the right thing. Has it had an impact? It definitely has. It stopped me from going onto select committees and things like that. I mean, my card's been marked, definitely. So, you know, I didn't get onto the Work and Pensions Committee, which I wanted to, because I'd spoken out against the government. I didn't vote with the government. I'm not seen as reliable, and therefore, you know. But anyway, I still think it was the right thing to do.
I mean, I think that's so important for especially people my age group. I know there was some feeling with the election that a lot of people didn't like the Conservatives, but weren't quite ready to jump into Labour. They were sort of thinking they don't really align with me. So I think on a local level, just having an MP that's willing to say, I disagree with the government because of my principles is so important to for young people to think, even if the government does something bad, my MP will call them out on it, rather than just explain why it's actually a good thing. It's so important for young voters.
No, it's really nice to hear. And I think the more we can show that we're independently minded, you know, obviously broadly supportive of what the government's programme, of course, because I'm a Labour MP. But there will be things within that you think need to be tweaked a bit or changed a bit or softened a bit or, you know, whatever. And part of the role is to try and advocate for that. Doesn't mean you'll always get what you want, but at least you should stand up and say, actually, rather than do this, couldn't we do that instead? It would be better, and make the argument for it. And that's what I've been doing in the last few weeks and months. You know, I've been meeting with ministers and advisors to try and get them to soften their approach on certain things. That's the role an MP should be taking, in my view. You know, don't just blindly go along with everything. You know, you've got to represent your constituents' views as best you can, but also your own sort of point of view. You know, if you're just there to say yes to everything, I'm not sure that's really the role of an MP. You know.
Well, that's amazing. I think we have to wrap up there.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Honestly, that was incredible. Yeah.